All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today we are going to talk about kit, equipment, and preparedness. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. Who doesn't love a great guitar riff to start off your week? Thanks again for joining us here at Inside My Canoe Head from the wonderful capital of Canada, Ottawa, Ontario, where all those wonderful policies and decisions are made by your favorite federal government, who's here to help you in any and every way they can. And if you believe all of that, I've got a donation bin for you to jump to. Well, today we're talking about a really incredible topic. This is probably one of the most contentious ideas and theories that you'll find in the discussion of preparedness. In the entire schema of emergency management is kit and equipment. What do you need to have? What equipment do you need? What stockpiles do you need? Because of what you see online, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things today. We're going to talk about preparedness planning. We're going to talk about sources of ideas for kit and equipment, how we recommend that you identify it based upon our evidence and our education portfolio, and then lead into this week, the 7th week of the 10 weeks of practical preparedness here at Inside My Canoe Head and Preparedness Labs Incorporated, our parent company, where we're talking about all of the things and translating the last several seasons of theory and ideas into practical things that you can do for you and your family to help navigate the next disruption in a far better and have better outcomes, because that is the purpose of preparedness, right? Everything we do in preparedness is about the singular idea of having better post-event outcomes. That's why preparedness exists. And we always started off with a reminder that the first question you have to ask yourself in individual emergency preparedness is, who is responsible for my outcomes? And the answer needs to be you. To do anything in the schema or in the theory or in the entire genre of preparedness, you first have to accept personal responsibility for your outcomes. It is not the government's job to rescue you. It's not the government's job to feed, water, and house you or to pay your bills when bad things happen. That is your responsibility. If you adopt that, look at that incredible person in the mirror. Irrespective of your personal circumstances, you just look at that incredible person in the mirror and say, hey, I'm responsible for my outcomes. I got it from here. Let's get after it. Then you roll into preparedness planning. Now, we talk about kit and equipment from a slightly different perspective, and I'll get into it, but we're going to do a quick review on the framework of preparedness planning so you understand some of the things we're going to talk about in this episode and how they're referenced. We always start off with personal responsibility, as I said, but then we move to you defining your family. The reason we say that is because family is different, right? The nuclear Ward Cleaver family doesn't necessarily exist as the most numerous in the North American or across the world society. So we're likely to have families that are multi-generational and multi-locational, because if you have blended families, divorced families, remarried families, you're going to likely occupy several different locations. You might have multi-generational in the sense that you have multi-generations in the same house, or you have an elderly person who's a very important member of your family who's in a local home that constitutes part of your family. So first you have to define your family, and then you have to look at their special needs and requirements. Other than your standard human needs, how do the incredible people that make up your family differ? You might have somebody on a certain type of medication. You might have somebody with certain mental health challenges, certain mobility and physical challenges. You may have a family member in a wheelchair. That changes your preparedness perspective. So that's a quick assessment that you do. And then we talk about the fact that the entire foundation of individual and household emergency preparedness is your shelter-in-place plan, right? We are always going to default 100% of the time, unless it's on fire or flooded out, that you recover to your household and that you shelter in place with your family how you define them and their needs in your house for a timeline that you pick. Now, we have a lot of great episodes in the past seasons 6, 7, and 8 that talks about the theory of timeline, the idea of why you choose a shelter-in-place plan with a specific timeline. Now, the timeline means that you are able to provide the basic animalistic requirements of food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security for all those members of your family in your residence without access to utilities. So the water's turned off for whatever reason, the power's off, the gas line's off. Basically, you're on your own in your residence, however that looks, with your family, however that looks. And then you have to decide a period of time for which you want to be able to provide for those animalistic requirements without access to external resources. That is the basics of your preparedness plan. Now, on the timeline, we talk about 0 to 3 days, which is that typical 72 hours. We here at Inside My Canoe Head base our recommendations on research that's been done across North America based upon the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. So we base our emergency preparedness planning theory and education strategy here based upon access to and loss of the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. The reason for that is that you have to determine individually what does that look like for your family. So when you lose access to an element or a sector of critical infrastructure, and then when we look at the primary role of the public sector, so think of your government, their primary role, they'll talk about saving lives, but the reality is the primary role is to recover and restore critical infrastructure. Now, whether that's likely, depending on where you live, a combination of the private sector and the public sector, but if we look at the critical infrastructure, the water, the power, the systems go down, and sometimes they cascade one after another, how long does it take for them to restore? That's the theory that we use for a recommended timeline. And if you look at the data from North America, 94% of the time, critical infrastructure is restored within 14 days to the population. So, if you plan for 14 days to be able to provide the animalistic requirements to your family in a shelter-in-place plan at home, you will meet 94% of the expected events. That is a pretty good success. The other 5.8% or exactly 5.7 or 5.8% are total catastrophic losses. And think that occurs in times where you have some, like we're all familiar with the Moore, Oklahoma tornado that went through, or the number of tornadoes to go through. If that takes out the water treatment plant, the water treatment plant is not up and running in 14 days, right? That's a catastrophic loss. That falls into that 5.8 or roughly 6%. But if you look at building your timeline theory based upon evidence, not what the apocalyptic talking heads on the YouTube says, but if you look at the evidence, if you plan to be able to provide for 14 days, then you're going to hit the 94 percentile. The other element of it is your risk tolerance, right? Each one of us have a different personal risk profile, we called it, and we did a couple of episodes a week or two ago about building your personal risk profile, right? Understanding your comfort in uncertainty, understanding your self-confidence, your self-efficacy, your self-reliance, and your self-sufficiency belief, and what all of those individual terms mean, because they're all something different. And understanding you as an individual may want to do more planning because of your personality type than somebody may be very comfortable with uncertainty, and they're happy. I'll make a peanut butter and jam sandwich and take a bottle of water, and I'm good for a disaster. There are some people who have that self-belief in their ability to navigate, and that's what they rely on. So it's an intuitively personal response to exactly how you conduct personal preparedness planning. And we've got dozens of episodes on building that plan from scratch. The point here is to say there is a logical process in developing a personal and household preparedness plan based upon research and evidence, not apocalyptic talk that you hear online. And with that, we transition to the two sources of information about kit and equipment and preparedness that you will find in the world. Number one, someone tells you you need it. Now, that's likely coming from YouTube, an apocalyptic prepper. name any one of the prepper channels that talk about the coming of the end of the world. Stockpile these top 10 things. Here are the 15 things that that will be in short supply once the government collapses. Here are the top 10 barter items. You've all seen them. We've all heard them. Someone's telling you that you need to get it. The next one is government. The government's message is telling you to stockpile something. The government is advising that you need to have something on hand. That is a source of somebody telling you, or you have a podcaster out there who is telling you. Those are external sources of information, people telling you that you should do something, right? So again, it gets back to your risk profile. Where do you draw your trusted sources of information from? What we recommend here at Inside My Canoe Head and our parent company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated, is that you should be the one to determine whether kit and equipment is missing from your preparedness plan. And how we do that is by you finding a gap in what you want to do when you build the plan. When you conduct your preparedness planning for your household and you do not the hard, but the time-consuming and effort. This is free, by the way. Preparedness planning is free. You do the difficult work of sitting down and you build that family preparedness plan. And as you're doing that, you're building your shelter-in-place plan, and then you're looking at your trifecta of preparedness plans, which we'll get to shortly. And as you work through that, you are likely and potentially to come across a gap. In other words, you decide at a certain point of your preparedness plan that you would like to be able to do X, or you'd like to be able to support Y, and then you have a look around and you're like, hey, I'm missing this one piece of key equipment that would be very helpful to be able to do what I want to do. You've identified a gap in a preparedness plan you're creating for your family's specific needs and requirements. You've identified an item. That is how we recommend that you determine a list, if a list is required, of kit and equipment that you may need to acquire through various different sources. Now, if you're from a challenged economic position, a lot of times there are strategies out there as to how to figure out in groups or through community fundraising or other ways to get access to any kit and equipment that you believe is required. The first thing that we're going to look at today, and we're going to go through your shelter in place and your trifecta of preparedness plans to give you an idea of how you might identify kit and equipment that will be required for your household emergency preparedness plan. We start with your shelter in place plan. You've identified your family and their special needs and who they are. They're going to recover onto your home and they're going to stay there for a timeline that you've selected. So you have to be able to require food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security for each one of those. So food is 2,000 calories per day, 4 liters of potable water. You need to be able to keep the rain and the wind out and the snow out. You need to be able to provide basic first aid to individuals. You need to be able to maintain a reasonably common core temperature. The gray-bearded Green Beret, and I give him credit for this every time because it's not mine, he talks about your shelter is based upon the thermal regulation of core body temperature. So basically, your shelter has to be able to keep people reasonably comfortable, cool in hot conditions, warm in cooler conditions, and keep the wind out. Now, you can do it in an apartment, you can do it in a home, you can do it in a farm, you can do it in a high-rise. You just need to be able to keep the wind, the rain, the snow out, and keep the warmth and temperature at a certain reasonable level. Safety, you need to be able to provide for people not getting injured in where they are, so that's lighting, that's information. You need to be able to draw sources of trusted information. We have a couple of great episodes on how to determine what is a source of trusted information. And for security purposes, you have to be able to keep your family safe and secure wherever they may be. And we've got a week coming up in the 10 weeks of practical preparedness on security. So those are the basic things that you have to be able to do for your family in the residence that you have, right? So as you look at that and you go through the planning, you may look at, hey, listen, when you do the planning, I've got 7 people in my family. That means I need to be able to provide 14,000 calories a day of a 1/3 distribution, depending on what diet you're on. And on top of that, I need to be able to provide, 7 times 4, 28 liters of potable water a day. Do I have that, and can I do that? That's a question only you can answer. And then you have to determine whether there's a gap in there. But sometimes the specifics aren't that simple. You have to think about, and we have an episode that talks about food as a system, right? So you not only have to be able to acquire the appropriate food for your shelter in place plan, you have to store it. And then you have to be able to cook it, right? I mean, it's cool to give everybody granola bars for a couple of hours, but on day 3, if you're handing out Cliff Bars and cold water and it's the middle of winter, you're going to have a freaking mutiny on your hands, right? So you're going to have to make hot cup of tea and a hot cup of water. And I wrote an entire blog post on my website, preparednesslabs.ca, on coffee and preparedness and the power of a warm cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate to somebody who is in distress to bring down their mental health, anxiety, etc. So you may have to do that. You know how your family operates. You know what they like to eat. Immediately going to beans and rice sounds really cool on the preparedness scape, but have a look at your family members. On day 3 of beans and rice, how's that going to go, right? You're probably going to get your arse tossed out the front door and somebody's going to go try to find an open McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like, what your family needs to eat is the type of food you need to be able to provide. How you provide that determines what the cooking requirements are. What are those cooking requirements? Do I need to have an alternate ability to cook? So when we look at your shelter in place plan, you just have to look at the 6 animalistic requirements, reflect your family on top of them, and see if there's anything missing. Now, from a planning perspective, we're going to switch to your trifecta of preparedness plans. Now, we move on to the trifecta because this is the basic requirement for individual and household emergency preparedness planning. There is another step in the evolution of preparedness planning, but if everybody has this, you're ready for pretty much anything nature and Mr. Murphy can throw at you. The number 1 trifecta of preparedness plans is the most likely and the least dangerous event, which is a significant power loss, which means your power goes out, and we're talking for a reasonably long period of time, a day or 2, 3, 4, 5 days, something like that. What does that look like for your family? And when you look at your shelter in place plan, and then you look at that plan with the idea that I don't have any power, so now is that going to affect how I provide food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security to my family? And as you walk through all of the things that you'll need to do, this is where you get into, I'm going to have to cook food, right? So how do I do that? If my stove is electric and everything in the house is electric, or I have a gas stove and the gas is out, how do I heat food without access to natural gas or power? How do I do that? Some people have barbecues with side burners. You're in. Do you have sufficient fuel for your timeline to run that as your normal cooking source? How do I boil water? I like hot coffee. Iced coffee is really Gucci and cool to some people. I like hot coffee. And then you got to think about, if you live in an extreme climate environment, how do I generate heating and cooling without access to power? Now, a lot of times that can be different parts of the room, using passive solar heating, opening your windows, creating breezes, all these other things that you can, but you may need a supplementary requirement to that. And how we build that in your trifecta of preparedness plans for a power loss is something we call the minimum power profile. So if you sat back and you went through everything in your house that's plugged into the wall, and you thought about really seriously, when the power is out, what is the minimum things we actually need to have up and running to enable me to provide for the animalistic requirements for my family, then you generate a total amps, watts, volts, however you want to do the electrical equation, but you get a minimum power profile, which means I need to be able to generate this many watts on demand for the period of my timeline, right? And this could be from, for example, you may have somebody who has climate-controlled medication in the family, right? Somebody who needs certain medication that has to be kept in the fridge. Well, you can't let the fridge run out of power. So maybe you don't try to power a massive home fridge, but you have a mini fridge that you can put the medication in, and that requires a much lower power draw, right? Or maybe you can take a block of ice out of the freezer, put it in a Coleman or Yeti cooler, and put the medicine in it. Like, there's different ways to think through it. But if the end of it is, I gotta need power, then you start building that minimum power profile. One of the top things that comes out is you're probably going to want to know sources of information. And welcome to the 21st century. That means access to your cell phone and the cell data network. That means you're going to have to be able to have your cell phone powered 24/7. To do that, you need some type of battery backup for your cell phone. Now, most of us carry power banks. Some of us have Jackery systems. However you decide to do it, you have to think, well, if there's 6 cell phones in the family, I really only need one powered. Yes, you're going to cheese off everybody else, but you're going to need access to sources of information. The reason you're going to need that we suggest you're going to need the cell phone and not just a radio, because you have to remember a radio station speaks to the city. Now, I live in a city of 1 million people, right? We had tornadoes go through here in 2018. It's pretty devastating. A lot of damage was done. And we had our local CBC radio station putting out very good information, like a great source of information, but it was speaking to 1 million people. So the message was general, vague, and non-specific. My neighborhood-specific information and what was going on in my specific neighborhood and what concerns I had to be aware of was not available on the radio, but it was available on more detailed sources that were only accessible through cell data connections, right? So I had to have a cell phone. So I did, and I had a battery backup. I've got sufficient charges in my house to recharge my Apple iPhone 63 times. So if it needs more than 63 charges, I think we've got a bigger. But the idea about building a minimum power profile is depending on you and your family and your needs, that will look differently, right? So then you get a minimum power profile and you have to ask yourself, how am I going to provide this power? Is it going to be just the 90% solution out there, my friends? It's really simply going to be a handheld power bank for a couple of days of power outage. For your cell phone, I just bought another one. It cost me $40 on Amazon. It's got a solar panel in it, so I can recharge it in the sun on a windowsill, and then it powers my cell phone. That may be it. Like, that's literally it. You've got a $30, $40 item. As I like to say, $40 Canadian, a lot less American. But that's it. That may be the only thing you need to buy. And if you don't have $40, which is a reality, now you got to set a plan in place to figure out how to acquire that. So that's how you go through the power loss scenario. And then when we move it to your most dangerous and least likely, the other end of the spectrum of events that could happen to your family, we talk about evacuation. Now, evacuation, I've got no less than 5 separate episodes on household and emergency preparedness planning for evacuations in the last 2 seasons. But to sum it up here, the first and most important thing you have in your trifecta of preparedness plans for evacuation is a destination, right? You must have a predetermined destination where you and your family are going to go in the highly unlikely event that you need to evacuate your home and leave your stuff behind, right? We always advocate for you to shelter in place because an evacuation is such a highly unlikely thing, but it is potentially devastating and traumatic for the family, which is why we call it the most dangerous event that a family can plan for. So when you plan for an evacuation, you have a predetermined destination, and we recommend it's between 100 to 150 miles away at a friend and family member's house that is likely not to be affected by the same event that you are, right? It's a little bit more difficult in certain situations like Florida, for example, but a hurricane can be survived inland is different from getting away from the shore and the storm surge, etc., right? You can't evacuate the entire state of Florida north. It's not possible, but what you can is evacuate coastal communities to an interior town where friends or family live and a basement that you can sit in. The idea being a destination is simple, right? where do you want to restart planning your life, right? So in the exceptionally highly unlikely event you are evacuated, and then whatever the threat is destroys your home, you're now sitting there with what you have, and we'll talk about that in a second, and you have to start replanning your life, talking to insurance companies, talking to your business. Maybe your business got destroyed, and now you're not only lost your home, but you're now completely unemployed, etc. And you have to start working down that process. Would you rather be in a friend's basement where you're loved and you're welcomed and you're taken care of and you're not totally overstressed? Or do you think the Motel 6 with you and that wonderful family of yours stuffed into one room, paying $200 a night and eating $100 a day of horrible for you takeout food, you think that's the place where you're going to restart? And then you want to go even to the worst, where you have no privacy, as a public shelter. If you have to use a public shelter and there's 200 of you on cots in the middle of a hockey arena, is that how competing for Wi-Fi with everybody? Is that how you want to restart your life and try to sort things out? So you find that destination, number one. And then kit and equipment always comes up in evacuation. What do I take with me, right? So a very simple process for that is you've got to get from where you are to your planned destination. What do you need to do that? It's that simple, right? What method are you transporting in? How many people do you have? How long is it likely to take you to get there? What are the obstacles you're likely to face in your primary and your alternate route? Again, oversimplification at this point, but think about your animalistic requirement of food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security. How do you provide and provision for that on the move from A to B? Now, there's a whole different discussion about what do you determine to be priceless and how do you decide what to withdraw from your house. Everybody wants to take everything. And, maybe you have a big Hemi truck with a massive 16-foot enclosed trailer with all your belongings in. Okay, that's great movie stuff. The reality is if you have a normal car like the rest of us, you're not going to get many things into your car, right? You're not going to get most. And people are going to have to determine what is priceless. And I got a whole episode on how to determine what is priceless in your life and what is not. But that being said, when you look at that trifecta of preparedness plans, you look from your shelter in place plan, you look at how you're going to conduct your minimum power profile and what a power loss in your house looks like and what an evacuation looks like. And you map out how you intend to respond to those events and how you intend to navigate. And when you find a gap, when you identify, I want to be able to do X, but I lack the kit and equipment to do that, you've now identified a kit and equipment gap in your preparedness plans, and now you figure out what to do. I'm telling you this in the education strategy because that is far more intelligent and far more economic than simply believing somebody's list of the top 10 things. And what really drives me insane is when you watch on YouTube and people talk about, for beginning preppers, you're just starting prepping, here's the 10 things you got to start. And I just lose my crap. I'm like, why do you think a family needs to do that? Right? A family needs to stockpile 2 years of food and then you got to evacuate. We can go down this, but it's just ridiculous. And I've engaged one or two of these folks and I've asked them, okay, great. You say these are the top 10 things a prepper should start with. Please provide me with the evidence that backs that up. Because remember, nobody cares about your opinion and belief. That's the reality of the world. I'm a researcher, right? So when I tell you things here at Inside My Canoe Head, it's because I've either read the research or I've done the research to demonstrate this trifecta of preparedness plans is the way to go. I don't make it up. It's not my opinion. It's what the evidence tells us is the best strategy for you that has the highest degree of probable positive outcomes post-event, right? I don't give you a top 10 list of things because one doesn't exist that is practically based upon evidence. It doesn't. I'm sorry. Disagree with me. I love it when people do. But the last part of your trifecta of preparedness plans is your financial income loss. And this is where we talk about opening the door to what preparedness really represents, right? To this point, everybody thinks preparedness is related to natural disasters, shelter in place, and that stuff is a great foundation. But when I talk about income loss, Because let's be frank, losing your family's primary source of income on a moment's notice because maybe the event missed you, but it burned your work building down and your job is gone. Losing your job on a moment's notice, aka the pandemic, can be just as impactful as having your house burned down. When you sit down and you go through your trifecta of preparedness plans and you reach the third one, which is income loss, and you start to plan through, how am I going to provide for all of the animalistic requirements for my family when I no longer have a source of income? Then you start getting into planning, okay, I need a source of income, so when I get fired, and this is a phrase we use a lot here at Inside My Canoe Head, when you get fired, what is your plan? So today is a Monday morning. What if you walked in to work tomorrow morning and you were met by HR and you're fired on the spot? You're done. What's your plan, right? If you don't have a plan, you've set yourself up for failure. What do you pivot to? What industry do you pivot to? Maybe you pivot to another business in the same genre, the same type of work that you're trained for. Whether it's moving to another company, whether it's moving to a different position, whether it's retraining to be a plumber, whatever your plan may be, it is your responsibility to have a pivot plan for how you intend to change your source of income when you lose your primary source of income, right? It's not the government's job to send you checks to cover your butt. It's your responsibility to be able to provide the income to support the family that you've chosen to have in the place that you've chosen to live, right? Now, some people will say, I got to sell everything and move. That's great, right? Welcome to trades work. Welcome to you go where the work is and you don't sit and whine because there's no work where you are. This is personal responsibility 101, and you have to look at financial preparedness. And when you do that, you start to realize that preparedness based upon disasters and stockpiles and kit and equipment is just the beginning. You open the door to this. Now we're start talking about preparedness on a whole bunch of different planes of your lifestyle. We're talking about strategic planning. We're talking about strategic thinking. This opens the door to a plethora of opportunities for you to create a life and rock an incredible life based upon preparedness that will totally blow away everybody else. This is the value of preparedness. This is why it is far more than kit and equipment and stockpiles and top 10 things you have to do. But to sum it up, today's episode is all about kit and equipment and preparedness, right? How do you know if you need something? Somebody can be yelling at you on the internet telling you these are the top 10 things to stockpile. Run the hell away from them. I'll be blunt. We recommend that you go through the plan. You take the time and effort. Remember, preparedness is free. It doesn't cost you any money to be prepared. People telling you it does are charlatans selling you something. Go through the preparedness plan. Follow the strategy. Ours is free of charge. Go to preparednesslabs.ca. There's a free download there for you to get you started, right? Yeah, I got a whole bunch of stuff I could sell you, but the point being is the free download is there. Then you sit and you walk your family through it. You develop that plan. You probably at some point in that plan, whether it be your shelter in place plan, your evacuation, whatever it might be, you're likely to find a gap where there's a piece of equipment that would make your strategy work and you don't have it. Now you've identified an item that you need to acquire. You make a list. You put the list in the order of importance. And then if you have the money, you simply execute. If you don't have the money, you work on strategies. I've worked with community groups before, for example, where one of the top things every family should have is a working fire extinguisher, right? I mean, you want to stop a house fire to take your house down? Sometimes if you catch it early, it's just a full-size ABC chemical fire extinguisher is what you need, but not everybody has the $60 to buy one. So we work at one point with communities about how do we create this desire and a need. So we started fundraising. We work with the local volunteer fire department, and together over a period of time, they were able to acquire sufficient number of working fire extinguishers for the entire community. right? So now everybody had one, but nobody had any money. But they got together, pooled their social capital, pooled their needs together, and they were able to develop a plan and a strategy. It took a little bit longer than the person with cash in the bank. Fair enough, I get that. But as a community, without going and whining to the government, as a community, they were able to build a strategy that was able to execute that, right? But I'm telling you again, go ahead. If you're going to buy a bunch of crap that you see on TV thinking that that's going to make you prepared, let me tell you this phrase and remember it. Preparedness is a lifestyle. Preparedness is not a stockpile. There is no level or kit and equipment that will make you prepared. It is your brain, your intelligence, and the strategic effort that you put into planning. Preparedness will take time and effort, not money. So thanks for joining us this week on Inside My Canoe Head. This episode was all about something that I'm passionate about, if you didn't figure that out already. If you like what you hear, drop over to insidemycanoehead.ca. There is a button there where you can buy me a coffee. If you don't want to buy me a coffee, I'd appreciate you hopping over to your favorite platform and give us a review. If you don't want to do that, then just go over to YouTube, my channel. I have 270 videos there, 73 subscribers. Give me a thumbs up. That's all I need. And if you don't want to do that, just tell a friend. It's pretty cool to listen to us. If you have any questions, good, bad, or indifferent comments you want to make, drop over there to the website. There is a link to send me an email at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. Tell us everything you want to hear. Tell us what you're missing. Tell me you disagree with me, that you think that there's a top 10 things beginner preppers should buy. I'd love to get into that with you. Follow us on social media. We've got a lot great stuff coming for you. Take care, stay safe, and have a great week.